Good day. My name is Daniela Ellerbeck, Legal Advisor to Freedom of Religion South Africa, or 4SA for short. And today I'm talking with 4SA's Executive Director, Michael Swain, about the so-called SPY Bill, or as it's officially known, the General Laws Amendment Bill 2023, or GLAB. Now, the SPY Bill is the latest in a series of laws, including the Anti-Money Laundering Act and Anti-Terrorism Act, that you would think should have nothing to do with religious freedom. However, according to 4SA, all these laws limit the fundamental right to freedom of religion, with the SPY Bill arguably being the greatest threat to religious freedom we have seen yet. Now, Michael, do you have any general concerns about the SPY Bill?
Yes, absolutely. And as a general principle, people who live in free democratic societies have typically been able to assume that, providing they are living in a law-abiding and peaceful way, they will be free from state intrusion into their private affairs. Things like eavesdropping and surveillance, especially when those things can be used to potentially sanction you severely, are typically associated with totalitarian states like Russia and China. This bill is therefore a significant departure from the norm. And it's even bizarre in the South African context because we are still very much a fledgling democracy. The law, as we look at it, appears to be copy-pasted straight out of the communist playbook, where obviously civil rights and human rights are very limited. And we believe, therefore, that any law that proposes that the state can pry into what would otherwise be private information and then give it the power to analyze and then decide whether this poses a national security threat or not should be viewed with deep suspicion. And what is even more concerning is that this bill makes it clear that a major focus will be on NGOs and churches. Now, these are the very entities that play such a crucial role in providing many of the services and support that the state fails to offer. And very importantly, and perhaps very significantly in the context of the SPY Bill, they are the very organizations that are largely able to hold government to account, to provide, for example, alternative views and perspectives or narratives, which our democratic process frankly requires in order to remain democratic. But Daniela, let me just maybe flip and ask a question to you. Because you've done a detailed analysis of this, what are the specific or maybe the major problems or threats that it contains from a religious freedom point of view?
Sure. So, Michael, in its current form, the bill, so this proposed law, contains several problematic proposals, and I'm just going to highlight the top three for the sake of time. So, threat number one, the SPY Bill allows South Africa's intelligence agencies, in other words, spies, to conduct security competency tests for purposes of issuing a security clearance certificate to anyone who wants to start either a religious organization, for example, a church, shul, mosque, etc., or a non-governmental organization, NGO, which is undefined but would include civil society organizations like 4SA. Okay, so we've got the spies now who are doing security competence tests on church leaders and religious leaders and NGOs before you're allowed to start one. Then threat number two, the SPY Bill expands the definition of national security to include not only threats, but potential threats, okay, opportunities, and even potential opportunities. Now, Michael, this is unclear. These are undefined, and this entire concept, potential opportunities, is open-ended, vague, and subjective. And essentially, these could mean almost anything that can be deemed to have any sort of effect on South Africa, potentially. And these will then be seen as having an effect on national security. Now, threat number three, the SPY Bill expands the definition of a threat to national security. So, okay, we have the fact that the SPY Bill is going to allow the spies to decide who gets a security clearance certificate or not if they want to start a religious organization or a church. And we've got threat number two, that national security now basically means anything under the sun. And threat number three is that a threat to national security is expanded to include subversion and undue influence by hostile interests on government processes, policies, and the sovereignty of the state and its organs, end quote. Now, this is so wide, Michael, that it could potentially include members of civil society, like 4SA, who oppose policies, regulations, and proposed laws, such as bills, that the government wants to adopt. For example, 4SA is opposing the spy bill. Now, it is especially concerning that it does not exclude and protect lawful political activity, advocacy, protest, or dissent. Now, lawful political activity, advocacy, protest, and dissent is protected somewhere else in the bill in relation to something else. But it is not included as a consideration when looking at hostile interests on government processes or policies.
Wow. I mean, look, it really does, and I think in a very real sense. And we don't like to overblow things when we look at things. We are pretty considered in our analysis, but it really does represent an existential threat, therefore. And I think let's just zero in for a minute, Daniela, if you could, on what effect would these proposals therefore have specifically on the religious sector?
So, I mean, Michael, looking at thread number 1, right? The one that says that the spies can now conduct security tests to determine if you get a security clearance certificate, which you then need if you want to start a church or an NGO for that matter. So, I mean, this goes wider than just religious freedom, because you're going to have the spies deciding who gets to be an active civil society organization or not. Now, the spy bill will allow the state to dictate who can start a church, and therefore it's potentially open to abuse, because it will allow government to silence voices of those who oppose it and or who do work for the community independently of the state. Now, for example, you will be required to obtain a security clearance certificate before you are allowed to start a religious organization like a church, and for that matter, a non-governmental organization. And this is direct interference, Michael, by the state in the rights of religious communities and civil society. This type of vetting by spies allows them to gather information related to criminal and financial records, personal information, and, quote, any other information which is relevant to determine the security clearance of a person, end quote. Now, Michael, they don't even need to tell you what information of yours they accessed. I mean, personal information is limitless. They never need to tell you what they looked at, what they listened to, none. And they could also intercept your communications or get copies of your cell phone records or internet browsing history. Now, it is totally unacceptable in a constitutional democracy that the state can dictate to a religious community who is allowed to start, for example, a religious organization like a church or mosque, and who is not. And this really does open up the door, Michael, to the state asking questions about doctrine and then deciding which doctrines and practices are acceptable and allowed and will get you a security clearance certificate, and which are not, or under the guise of state security.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many constitutional rights that almost inevitably are going to be infringed by this particular piece of legislation. And I think what we're looking at here in a nutshell is state capture, not even through the back door. I mean, this is state capture coming straight through the front door. I don't think we've seen such a blatant attempt to potentially literally decide who can or who cannot preach, teach, form religious organizations, work in the religious sector. I don't think we've seen anything like this. I mean, we've certainly had some concerns in the past, and some very deep ones, and we fought significant battles for the integrity of religious freedom and the right for people to live out and practice their faith without undue state interference. But this is really coming straight through the front door, which is why I said I believe this is potentially an existential threat. So tell me, I mean, just wrap this section up quickly. Could this bill be potentially used against religious leaders or groups that criticize government specifically?
Michael, absolutely it can. The spy bill is a type of draconian law typical of totalitarian states, which you've already mentioned, and it harkens back to apartheid era. Like apartheid era, if IT was part of the apartheid era and cell phones. So this law should have no place in the new South Africa's constitutional democracy. And it's certainly possible that powerful, even popular religious leaders or religious groups that oppose government could find themselves being denied security clearance certificates or be subjected to greater and far more frequent scrutiny than others. And it's also important to know that if your church or NGO is denied a security clearance certificate, you could potentially be viewed as a terrorist organization and would not be able to send or receive money and a bunch of other things. And it could literally shut down the entire organization because remember that POC the Protection of Constitutional Democracy Against Terrorism and Related Activities Act, makes terrorist activity a crime.
Yeah.
So never mind the organization being shut down. If you're viewed as a terrorist and fall within that very wide category, and we've got other interviews about the very problematic definitions there, you could go to jail. So this is just, it's a very, very problematic bill. So Michael, is this Bible a threat to the religious sector only?
No, and I think it's important to perhaps pull the lens back and realize that this bill basically applies to everybody. It potentially allows anybody and everybody to be investigated. It is turning South Africa into a surveillance state. And that's a very, very concerning thing. But basically, anyone who's deemed to be a threat to national security can be investigated. And as you mentioned, the state has no obligation under this potential law to even inform people that they've been part of an investigation. They can use their power to spy on civil society activists, religious organizations, journalists, and anything basically that they would view to be a threat. And we see that this is definitely a significant threat to civil liberties and freedom of expression in general. And particularly because that forms such a significant part of the tapestry of religious freedom rights, it inevitably has religious freedom front and center in its sights. So the other thing which I think is of tremendous concern is that this bill also proposes to empower effectively and to set up clandestine mass communications interception. There's the proposal that there's an agency under the State Security Agency, which is going to be called the National Communications Center, or the NCC. And effectively what this will do is it's going to use technology that can allow the conversations of literally thousands, if not millions of people to be stored. It's basically able to capture every digital footprint. That means social media, messaging, Zoom calls, WhatsApp, you name it, and even simple conversations over phones and landlines. And of course, once it has this digital footprint and your communications have been captured, then the opportunity is there to effectively then analyze all that mass body of data, which is increasingly easy with the sophistication of technology. And if it then identifies people who seem to be a sort of security threat, then obviously they can be specifically targeted by the intelligence agency. So yeah, it's way, way broader than just the religious sector.
Sure. So Michael, I think many people are listening or watching this want to know what the status of this Bible is. What is the status of this proposed law?
Well, this bill was already approved by Cabinet in May this year, and it was submitted to Parliament on Tuesday, the 29th of August this year. And at the moment, and which is why we thought it was wise to give a preliminary heads up on this thing, it is currently being considered as to which parliamentary committee will actually oversight its progress, so to speak. And at this point, the bill has not been allocated and it is not yet open for public scrutiny and comments. But when it is, this will be an absolutely critical moment for those people, and I hope that's everybody, who sees the potential threat that this absolutely poses, to have their say and to make their submissions. We need to be ready to rally in literally tens of thousands of numbers to push back against this otherwise utterly draconian law, which will have potentially such disastrous consequences. And again, one of the things that I want to get your comment on, seems to me a little bizarre that it's being introduced right now, because as we know, we're coming now to the end of this parliament. General elections are taking place next year. The current parliament's going to be dissolved in less than a year. Why would, and maybe just to speculate, government even introduce this type of bill in the current parliamentary session?
Michael, that is a very valid and perplexing question. And you're correct. The current Parliament's term ends on the 21st of May, 2024, whereafter the sitting Parliament, so the Parliament that this bill's been introduced in, will dissolve and cease to exist. Because remember, we elect our members of Parliament in the national elections. So when the next national elections come, Parliament dissolves, we elect a new Parliament. So the 2024 elections must then take place within 90 days of this dissolution to elect a new Parliament. And if the bill is still making its way through Parliament when the current Parliament's term expires on the 21st of May next year, the bill lapses too, which basically means it falls away. And this means that it will have to be introduced afresh in the next Parliament, so the newly elected Parliament, which restarts the entire parliamentary process again from the beginning. Now, with the expiry of Parliament's present term being around the corner, I mean, May next year is very, very soon, given the legislature's normal pace of working through laws. And not only that, but the fact that between now and then, there's numerous constituency periods. They're going to be busy with election preparations and campaigning. It's, the festive season. There are a lot of days that Parliament is not sitting between now and May. So with the expiry of Parliament's present term being around the corner and much of members of Parliament's current work revolving around the upcoming elections, it is very concerning that a law of this magnitude that poses such drastic interference with constitutional rights and civil liberties, and I mean, religious freedom is affected by this bill, but it's not the only one. Think about freedom, think about the right to privacy of every single South African, which will be affected. I mean, you mentioned the NCC that is going to be gathering information, and they don't ever have to tell you what information they gathered of you. And the state's just going to have a complete profile of you if you have a cell phone and a computer and you use the internet ever, I'm assuming.
But effectively, there will be no privacy left. I mean, this will be the death knell of privacy.
It's reminding me of George Orwell's The Ministry of Truth. But yes, it's very concerning that a law that poses such a drastic interference with constitutional rights and liberties has been introduced in this late stage in the present Parliament, because this opens up the possibility of it being rushed through Parliament with undue haste, and hence the importance of remaining vigilant and for as many organizations and individuals as possible to respond swiftly to oppose it and as soon as it is open for public participation and comment.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Daniela. You've done a lot of work already researching and analyzing this. And we, 4SA, will obviously continue to monitor this spy bill and will be very quick to alert you, the public, our supporters, with opportunities as soon as the moment comes to comment on it. And once it's allocated to a parliamentary committee and the committee invites public comment on this bill, we will also prepare written submissions on the bill. We'll put a pro forma submission together. We'll certainly be working again with Dear SA, and we will definitely look for an opportunity to make oral submissions to Parliament. So keep an eye out for this. It's really imperative. And for more information, of course, go to our 4SA website, forsa.org.za. Sign up for our newsletter. You can also, we have a WhatsApp group that we've started as well to make it easy for you to get information. Visit our Freedom of Religion SA Facebook page. And of course, which you're probably doing now, keep watching and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So, Daniela, thanks again for your help. And until the next time when we return, we can certainly assure you that we are on the front lines in the fight for faith and freedom.
Good day. This is Daniela Ellerbeck, the legal advisor to Freedom of Religion South Africa. Remember to like and share this video and then click on the subscribe button to make sure you never miss our video updates on vital religious freedom issues.